Hey guys, we're back up to the Power Rankings for Big Brother 27 towards the end of week 8, which was another somewhat interesting week with some interesting developments, but we'll get it soon enough. Now, I am recording this on Tuesday, September 2nd, and if you're new to the channel or if you only follow the show through the televised episodes, I'll be heavily discussing what's been happening on the live feeds, and in doing so, I'll be spoiling the results of both the veto competition, but also the veto meeting. So if you don't want to be spoiling that stuff, now's your chance to click out this video. But with that out of the way, we have 11 people to talk about, and let's waste more time. Let's go into the video. So starting off at number 11, we have the latest boo from the season, and here we have Catherine. And Catherine going out here isn't too shocking, where I did say last week that she was the second most likely boot, where it did seem like that if Kelly had won the blockbuster, that she was the most likely person to go out, even though Kelly would have gone out had she not won the blockbuster. But after seeing the actual competition, with it being a puzzle, it just seemed like Kelly was the favorite to win that, and sure enough, Kelly won it, Catherine went out. And if we're talking about Catherine more generally, I found her game mostly disappointing, where I feel like for a lot of it, she was in a pretty precarious spot where she was kind of on the outs early on, could have been a target early on, had certain cons played out differently, but was able to find herself in a good position, largely due to her connection with Riley, though even then, I feel like there is some not so savory elements to that. And I feel like had Riley stayed in the game, she probably would have been dragged during a lot of it, where a lot of people would have been afraid to put up Catherine due to upsetting Riley because people cared about Riley's opinions for some reason. And I feel like she seemed like the type of person that would get to the end and lose someone like Riley in a jury vote. So in a lot of ways, I felt like there was a little bit of upside to Riley leaving the game. I feel like there could have been this opening for Catherine to potentially step up her game, as I feel like Riley was kind of hindering her from playing her own game, where he even actively discouraged her from pursuing her own connections. But by the end, it just didn't really pan out. I feel like this wasn't a great 8-8 result for her, and by the end, she didn't really get much of a chance to stay. So I feel like for those reasons, I feel like I was never super high on Catherine's game, and while there was some potential, we just didn't really get to see it. And obviously, she's now out of the game to where she's here at number 11. And with that, we have 10 people left in the game to talk about. As usual, I've been ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their current game position. But number 10, we have the person who I believe is the most likely to be voted out on Thursday night, and that person is Mickey. Now, obviously, Mickey is someone who we have seen win some blockbusters along the way, and I feel like that's the main saving grace for her, is that I feel like Mickey could win the blockbuster on Thursday night, but as things currently stand, it does seem like she's the most likely person to be evicted, to where if she's still on the block against either Ashley or Vince, that she'll be voted out there. And again, I feel like Mickey has been in the spot before where she has been on the block and would have been voted out had she not won the blockbuster there. And I feel like this will largely carry over this week, where even though she is kind of working with the people within the judges, she's not really within that alliance. And I think it's pretty apparent that a lot of people within that will be fine letting her go at this point, especially when Ashley or Vince are the alternatives. So it's not looking too great for Mickey here. And beyond that, I feel like there's some other not great things, and the fact that she did approach Keanu about like having Ava as the renom, kind of doing the judges' dirty work for them, and also making it harder for Ava to vote to keep Mickey around if she were to stay up on the block. Though, to be fair, Mickey was already not getting Ava's vote, so take that for what you will. So again, it's not looking great for Mickey, and I feel like she hasn't really stepped her game that much, with the main positive being the fact that she did kind of repair a relationship with Rachel, to where maybe that could be an option. But beyond that, it's not looking too great about Mickey both this week and moving forward, to where she's here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have another person who's currently on the block, and here we have Vince. And this was a pretty bad week for Vince, all things considered, where he should have been pretty safe this week with Keanu winning HOH, Keanu being someone who had been pretty blindly loyal to him for a lot of the game. And while Keanu was kind of waking up to Vince last week, I feel like it wasn't really enough to deter Keanu from wanting to work with him moving forward. And yet, Keanu proceeds to put Vince up anyway, despite Vince begging Keanu to not put him up. And you even have Keanu realizing after the fact that he regrets putting up Vince, which is pretty funny there. And beyond that, you have Vince spending a lot of time trying to get Morgan to use the veto on him, despite her being on the block and her winning the veto for herself, and he ends up just failing at that. But beyond that, I feel like he also kind of dropped the ball in the renom situation, where he had wanted Lauren to be the renom, which would have been pretty bad for him and made it pretty unlikely that he would have stayed over Lauren. But beyond that, I feel like even against Ashley, I feel like he hasn't really done a lot of work to secure the vote in the case that he is up against Ashley, where I feel like Ashley seems to have a bigger backing at this point, to where it does seem like Vince would go home over Ashley if Mickey were to win the blockbuster. And even against Mickey, I think there's definitely a chance that the vote could shift moving forward to where the likes of Ava have talked about just being fed up with Vince and wanting him out of the game. So I'm not feeling too great about Vince at this current point. I feel like the fact that he's on the block at all this week with Keanu being HOH is pretty bad, and I feel like he could have easily avoided that. But beyond that, I feel like he did some pretty bad work this week in terms of getting what he wanted and just being Vince during a lot of the week as well, with him once again whining and sulking and kind of being pathetic. I think his behavior has gone to the point where I don't think he can win a jury vote, where I feel like a lot of people just see him as his weasel and see him as a pretty pathetic person, with him constantly whining and constantly like being a bad ally, with him constantly like backstabbing his own allies. And I feel like those things have really soured Vince's reputation in the house, to where even if he does survive this week, I feel like he's going to be in a pretty tough spot to win the game. But considering that he is not even secure to where there is still a very real shot that he goes home this week, I'm not feeling too great about him, to where he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone who is not on the block right now, but I just feel like they had no shot at winning at this point. By number 8, we do have Kelly. And yeah, Kelly is safe. And yeah, Kelly didn't really do anything that poorly this week. Or if anything, I feel like her long-term safety has probably improved with this talk about a Lauren, Ava, Kelly final 3, to where that would at least give Kelly a path towards the end of the game. Not to mention Keanu winning HOH is a pretty good result for her. But at this point, I just don't really see how she wins the game. I feel like she, aside from her relationship with Lauren and Ava, I feel like she hasn't really done much legwork. I feel like she doesn't really have much respect in the house. And I feel like at this point in the season, it's hard for me to see how she really turns that around, to where even though this isn't necessarily a bad week for Kelly, I don't think she did anything particularly bad outside of just normal Kelly stuff. I feel like at this point, it's a little too late, and I would be very shocked if she were to go on to win the game, to where she's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we're moving on now to the current HOH, and here we have Keanu. And this was a pretty funny result here with Keanu winning HOH. It's something that I kind of been hoping for a while, for Keanu to win HOH, just to see what he would do with actual power. And what do you know, he doesn't play it super well, where admittedly he has a decent idea and wanting to target Morgan, who is his pretty big power player in the house at this current point, is also someone who's attached to Vince, someone that he seems to care about in the house. And you can at least see the logic in him wanting to put up Morgan alongside Vince after he thought that Vince would use the veto on Morgan, but he later comes to regret it and spends a lot of the post-veto deliberations like trying to get Morgan to use the veto on Vince, where it just seemed like he was trying to like make up for a previous mistake, but even then, like, it doesn't go super well. He later backs down from it, and he eventually decides to put up Ashley, which by itself isn't that bad, where Ashley is another person who is within the core power structure right now, and theoretically, it could divide the judges to where it could open up the game a bit more for him. However, Keanu himself doesn't see it that way, where instead the main reason he does put up Ashley over Ava is that he wanted to build a relationship with Ava, where he felt like he was doing Ava a favor by leaving her out the block, and he felt like that would be like this pretty critical piece for him moving forward, when in reality, Ava really dislikes him and wants nothing to do with him. But yet Keanu just completely fails to see that. So even though he does technically make a decent enough renom, I feel like his reasoning there is pretty flawed. And beyond that, I feel like he's not really in a great spot to get the numbers to get his way, to where despite Ashley being his target at this current point, I feel like he's probably not going to have the numbers to do so, where at this point, it does seem like that Mickey is the most likely person to be evicted if she doesn't win the blockbuster. And even if Mickey does win the blockbuster, it seems increasingly likely that Vince will be the one evicted over Ashley. Now, yes, there's still a couple days left, and there could be some, like, pushing around, and to be fair, there is some dirt that Keanu could throw up there, like the fact that Ashley, along with some of the other judges, wanted Ava to be the renom in a spot to where Ava could be the swing vote there. But again, I feel like it's still not looking great for him. And beyond that, he's still going to be a pretty prime target in the future anyway, where especially if Vince goes out, I feel like Keanu will be a pretty prime target by the judges, to where it does seem like he'll need to like win out moving forward. So at this point, I'm not feeling too great about Keanu. I feel like the way he played this HOH has plenty of fallacies, and the fact that he is still going to be a pretty prime target in the future is why he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have the other person who is currently on the block, and here we have Ashley. Now I did consider having Ashley a bit lower, as she is on the block right now, and there is still a shot that she could go home this week. And I do think Ashley did make some mistakes that could make it harder for her to stay, where you have her talking to people like Vince about how she wants Ava to be the renom in a position to where Ava could be the swing vote in that position. And I feel like that's just dirt that could be used against her in the actual vote there. Beyond that, I feel like she didn't really do that much campaigning to keep herself on the block, where I feel like she kind of allowed the rest of her alliance to do the work for her, though even then it didn't really stick there. And again, the fact that she is on the block, the fact that she is still in a position to where she could go home is obviously not great. However, I do think she is still currently the safest person on the block of the current three. And I do think she did some good work after the veto meeting, where she did at least talk to Ava about how they could work with Lauren if they were to take out Vince. So I feel like she is kind of getting ahead of the 8 ball there in case this dirt about her wanting Ava to be the renom comes around to Ava. And to be fair, I mean, it does seem like Ava herself doesn't care that much that people want her to go up, where she just seems pretty indifferent to that. So take that for what you will. So I still feel like Ashley is still probably the safest person on the block right now. And I still feel like she's in a decent spot moving forward with her still being part of the majority alliance. However, with that side of the house not really having many strong competitors, I think could also see that being an issue for her long term. So I feel like there are definitely issues with Ashley long term, where again, she is on the block right now, could go home. Even if she stays this week, she is not a very strong competitor compared to the likes of Keanu or Lauren, heck, even Vince or Kelly. I feel like that could be an issue for her alliance getting the numbers and getting towards the end together. And I do also think she struggles with the jury vote as well, where I feel like it'll be hard for her to really garner a lot of respect, even though she is still in a good spot right now. So I feel like those things are a major reason why I can't have her any higher. But it's the fact that I feel like she's probably the safest person on the block right now and is still within the majority for the time being. That leaves her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, we have someone who I'm not feeling that great about at this point. However, they are at least off the block, which is something. But number 5, we do have Ava. And were not for the fact that Ashley is currently on the block instead of Ava, I actually would have Ava below Ashley at this current point, as I feel like she didn't play this week particularly well, where again, the fact that she was considered a replacement nom, the fact that the judges were so willing to throw her under the bus to have her be the replacement nom over Ashley really speaks to the fact that she's not in that great of a spot, which is funny considering that she is now being talked about as a potential swing vote for this actual eviction, which is kind of funny considering that the same people who are going to be relying on her vote were the same people who were just a few days ago trying to throw her under the bus. So I feel like that's something. But I feel like beyond that, Ava herself just doesn't care much about the game, where it does seem like she's kind of checked out a bit, to the point where she was told that she could have been a replacement nom, that there were these people pushing for her to go up over Ashley, and she didn't seem to react the greatest, where it didn't seem like she seemed to care that much over the fact that she could have been a renom there. So I feel like that's not particularly great. I feel like she is also someone who could struggle with win equity, where at this point, I feel like she doesn't really have much outside of her likability. And in general, I would say that her position as a swing vote for this week seems to be by accident, more so than her actively putting herself in that position. So I feel like those things are pretty big knocks to her game at this current point. And I do think, at the end of the day, I feel like I wouldn't have much confidence in Ava to actually go on to win the game. However, I also think that she should be safe for the near future, where even with the talk about her going up as the replacement nom, I feel like Keanu didn't really want to target her, where Keanu even wanted to build a relationship with Ava, so take that for what you will. And on top of that, there is now more talk about this final 3 between her, Lauren, and Kelly that could give Ava a pathway towards the end of the game, though at the same time, I don't think she's the most likely to win in that scenario, so I feel like those things are definitely what hold me back from having Ava higher. And again, I feel like we're enough for the fact that Ashley's on the block over Ava. I would have Ava lower here, but the fact that she's safe for this week is the reason why she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, we have someone who's remaining around the same spot compared to last week. But number 4, we do have Rachel Riley. And I feel like this was a reasonable week for Rachel, where it should have been a pretty bad outcome for her, where Keanu is someone who had just gone against Rachel the previous week, and Rachel had disavowed Keanu due to his actions from the previous week that almost got her put up. And I feel like this should have been a pretty bad outcome for her, with Keanu winning HOH and Keanu thinking about putting her up. But I feel like she did a good enough job at smoothing things over to where Keanu decided to not target her this week, to where instead his eyes were more so set on Ashley compared to Rachel, which I feel like is pretty good there. And while Ashley going out this week would obviously not be a great outcome for her, and that would actually leave her in a pretty bad spot, I think she's in a situation now to where if Vince goes out on Thursday night, she would be in a great spot moving forward, as Vince leaving would open up Morgan to working with Rachel. It would also keep both Mickey and Ashley safe, two people who are more amenable to working with her at this point. And it would also give the judges pretty good odds of winning the next HOH, to where at that point they would only have to beat Lauren and Kelly, which is obviously an issue in the sense that they're two of the better competitors in the house. And obviously, in general, I feel like that's an issue I have with the judges, is the fact that they don't really have the strongest competitors in the world. And I could easily see the likes of Keanu, Kelly, or Lauren winning a lot of these competitions in the post jury. But I still feel like Rachel is in a position to where if she gets her this week and takes out Vince, I feel like that would leave her in a pretty golden spot coming into the jury phase. And I feel like with her being one of the better competitors in the judges, I think that's still something I can give Rachel some credit for. So I feel like those things are all pretty good in my eyes. Not to mention the fact that I feel like her respect in the house is growing, and I could definitely see her like having some win equity if she gets towards the end. Though obviously the major problem there is how does she get there? And I feel like she may not have that path entirely secure at this current point, but I feel like the fact that she has the potential to move up in future weeks, and the fact that she was able to remain safe despite her having one of her worst case scenarios in Keanu winning HOH, was not to have her here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have the person who I had in number 1 last week, but they have moved down a bit. But number 3, we do have Morgan, and this was a bit of a debatable placement here, as I do feel like Morgan played this week pretty questionably, where I think the major deterrent to her is the fact that she did consider not using the veto on herself, where she did consider using it on Vince for a bit. And while she did eventually back down, the fact that she wavered at all in that decision is pretty questionable. And while I think Keanu winning HOH was her absolute worst case scenario here, where I do feel like she was in a pretty solid spot outside of Keanu winning HOH, she's in a spot now to where she is pretty likely to lose an ally of hers, where if Ashley goes, that's obviously a number from the Judges Alliance. If she loses Mickey, that's someone that she did have a previous connection with. And if she loses Vince, that's obviously a major piece for her off the board as well. Someone who would take a lot of heat for her. So again, I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like she will be coming out this week at a net negative with her losing at least someone who is within her alliance. So I feel like those things are a major reason why I did have to bump her down a bit, as I feel like this is a net negative for her across this week. And while I think she could still recover well enough considering the current circumstances, I feel like I still have to knock her a bit for that, with her being on the block, with her almost not using a veto on herself, and still being in a spot to losing her allies, while I feel like other people moved up a little bit. So it's for that reason that I did have to drop Morgan a bit here to number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have the same person that I had at number 2 compared to last week, but number 2 we do have Will. Now, I did consider putting Will in number 1, as I do feel like he is still the safest person in the house, where even though this is a bad week for him, with obviously Ashley going up on the block, who is one of the closest allies, and with his side losing out on the actual HOH comp, I still feel like Will is coming out this week pretty safe, to where Keanu didn't even consider putting him up at all, and really no one's really considering putting up Will. It does seem like he has a pretty smooth path moving forward. And I think a lot of that stems from his social game. And I still think he could win a jury vote, where I feel like he's someone who could win simply due to being pretty affable. And I feel like if he's able to get in the right endgame situation, he could potentially end up in that spot to where he could win the game. However, I still think this is still a net negative for him across this week, with him having his close ally on the block and him now essentially being put to the test here, where I feel like this is going to be a major opportunity for Will to really step up his game and really fight to save Ashley here. Now, we have seen Will in the past playing pretty hard and being somewhat effective in getting what he wants when he actually pushes, though at the same time, he's also backed down a good amount and has mostly been playing passively. So I think a lot of his ranking across this week will come down to how hard he really pushes to keep Ashley in all situations. And while I still think Ashley has a good shot at staying, I feel like Will's play across this week will have a factor in that. So I feel like those things are all major considerations for Will's short-term position, but I still feel like he's in a good enough long-term position to where he'll still be relatively high on this list. Though at the same time, I feel like the number 1 person has a bit more upside at this point, which is why he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 27 at this current point is Lauren. Now, this may be a bit of an overreaction, as I still have issues with Lauren's game, where, for one, she is not in the core Judges Alliance, which is the current majority group. I feel beyond that, she has still not been the most active player in the world, and I still think she has some perception issues that she'll need to overcome with her coming off as a bit meek and someone who's a bit spineless in the game. I still think those issues are there. However, I still think this was a pretty good week for Lauren, all things considered, where I think the fact that Keanu refused to even put her up, despite multiple people talking about her as a replacement nominee option, the fact that Keanu really put his foot down in keeping Lauren safe, I think really speaks something to Lauren's game. And I do think Keanu winning HOH was one of her better case scenarios there. I think she's also at a bit of a crossroads in the game to where the fact that Vince could go out this week is something that I think would greatly benefit Lauren, where I feel like Vince has consistently showed himself to be a pretty bad ally for Lauren. And I think Vince going out would finally lift that monkey off her back. I also like that she's starting to be more active in her end game plans, where she has been trying to lock in this final three with Ava and Kelly, which I think would be a fantastic final three for her, as I feel like she's the most likely person to win a jury vote of those three. And I still think she has a very good shot of winning final HOH in that scenario as well. So I feel like that's also pretty good. And in general, I think Lauren is one of the better competitors in the house, where I think while she's not in the core alliance at this current point, I think that core alliance and the judges don't really have many competitors left in the house. And I think that could really open things up for Lauren to start winning a whole bunch of competitions, especially someone like Keanu's targeted in the next week where he's not going to be able to win HOH. I think the pieces are starting to fall in place for Lauren to where if she's able to move forward in the game, I think she'll be able to win a whole bunch of comps. I think she could also build inroads with her relationships there. And I think Vince leaving the game is something that I think would also benefit her. So I do think at the end of the day, I feel like Lauren is someone who, despite you're not currently being in the best position in the house, I think the upside is there. I think in general, this is a good enough week for her. And I think if she's able to build upon what we saw from her this week, I think we could be looking at Lauren as a front runner in the future, which is why I did decide to bump her up here to number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so be on the lookout for that. I'm also streaming on Thursday night, talking about the live eviction as it happens, so be on the lookout for that as well. I'm also covering other shows right now, such as Survivor Australia vs. the World, and later in September, we'll get Survivor 49, so be on the lookout for that. I'm on Patreon and I have a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.